Hey everybody, welcome to our next session. We have PLC coming with us next for our training. Here's John. Hello there.
Hello.
I can hear you, John, which is great. I can see you. And Melanie, I can see you. Welcome. We'll just get everybody from the other session on board here, and then we can get going.
Okay.
Yeah. And we're recording. Life is good. And all righty, I think we're getting going and we're getting everybody on here. So I would like to welcome Team PLC to our next session. We have John Sullivan and Melanie Stout, both partners in PLC. They are experts in card not present recurring revenue. And in my humble opinion, are the gurus for helping companies really get as much revenue from their recurring revenue and involuntary churn recovery as possible. So with that, I'm going to hand this off to the two of you to run and give us a workshop on how to manage our new normal. So John and Melanie, take it away.
All right, thank you. So a bit of background. John, did you want to give the overview of PLC and Pulse and who we are?
Yes, I'd be pleased to do that. Good afternoon, everyone on the East Coast. Evening to our friends overseas, and still morning, I guess, for the Californians at all. Thank you very much for joining today. PLC is a consulting firm with over 100 years collectively in the payment space. Now, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it sure is a lot of experience. And the three partners are Paul Larson, our managing partner, myself, and Melanie. We met several years ago at a company called first New Sub Services, then Synapse became a division of Time Warner, now a division of Meredith Corporation. So it's been through a long journey. And at Synapse, we developed the patented process for renewing and retaining magazine subscriptions on a credit card. Now, you may not think something as obvious as that today is patentable, but back in the day, which was 1993, 94, that was a new idea. So Paul, Melanie, and I all cut our teeth on developing better ways to retain subscribers who signed up on credit cards, initially in the magazine space, and then we branched out into all e-commerce. We help merchants with all areas of best practices when it comes to payments, so that includes additional retention of their customers through best practices, as well as reducing costs through other best practices of understanding interchange and other costs and the effect that it has on their bottom line. Melanie will be our principal speaker today, and I will try not to say anything really stupid. And again, thank you very much for being here. And Melanie, please take it away.
All right. First, I would like to announce that we're doing a giveaway. This is a very subjective giveaway that in no way, shape, or form follows any of the rules that govern sweepstakes. We will be doing a $100 gift card giveaway for the best discussion contribution, so the MVP of contributing to our discussion here. If you unmute yourself and ask questions, you're welcome to do that if that's possible. Otherwise, chat questions, I'll keep looking over at the chat box to see what's coming in. We can also talk further during the breakout sessions, of course. But if you have anything to contribute from your experiences, we can all learn from each other. And if you have any questions as we go through, please do chime in. The MVP will be chosen by Sharon Gross, who is our Director of Client Success.
Great.
So first, I have a survey for everyone, and you can go ahead and type your answer in the chat. Where are you likeliest to have your reality show debut post-lockdown? My 600-Pound Life, Intervention, Borders, Divorce Court, or Snapped? So go ahead and take a moment if you don't have one immediately come to you. I see a lot of A's coming in.
Oh, yeah, I got to go A.
That makes sense. D, all right, someone might be in Italy. Their divorce rate just jumped up 30% as a result of the lockdowns.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
I think a lot of people in America, based on a 900% increase in wine and craft subscriptions, will be between B and E, respectively.
Yeah, those virtual cocktail hours with friends and family.
Yeah, to some degree, I think the B is leading to the A. All right, so today what we're going to talk about is how COVID has impacted payments and consumer behavior, expected impact on recurring payments, how you can tackle that involuntary churn, also an impact on fraud, and then a future opportunity. So we've seen obviously explosive e-commerce growth. If you can't leave your home to go shop somewhere, you still need to purchase things, which really relegates you to purchasing online. This is great news. This is data for pure e-commerce, not specifically for subscriptions, but it is reflective of where consumers are headed. There's been a big shift from offline to online. So a lot of consumers who previously would prefer to make a transaction in person are now doing it online, out of necessity. We expect that to a degree that will retain, people will continue having more comfort level shopping online. So that could be good news for e-commerce overall. We're seeing a big shift in online purchasing by categories. So necessities plus fitness, wellness, entertainment, and that comes under the guise of games, books, streaming media. Publishing has also seen a bit of a surge in activity, and that's including news publications, which kind of you could expect, but also lifestyle publications. As people are home, they need some sort of entertainment. Again, as I mentioned, wine and crafts and hobby are also up significantly. PaySafe, I did take a bit of your data, but I'm not going to steal your thunder for your later presentation. So this was just some interesting information about how consumers are paying by region, particularly in the US, a lot of credit card usage, plus a fair amount of debit card. The wallets, which we usually see among our consumer base, primarily being PayPal, are also pretty prevalent. Now, this one's interesting. The payment methods used for the first time, about 56% of consumers used a payment method that was new to them since the pandemic began. So again, what we've seen is a bit of a shift and increase in some digital wallets. We can expect that a lot of wallet expansion will grow as consumers are going back to retail shopping because they don't want to touch the devices. So they might be likelier to load their Apple Wallet or their Google Pay or use contactless credit cards, but we can expect that that will continue to grow. The bad news, obviously, lockdowns create massive unemployment. In the past, as you can see, these recessions that have hit with the spikes in unemployment, the most recent one being, the 2008 recession. What we did see in the subscription space then was less disposable income, which makes sense, right? Reduced consumer confidence, people not really spending as much or spending, buying the same amounts, but spending less on what they're buying. From a payments perspective, we tend to see an increase in refunds or in disputes, and typically that's in friendly fraud. Generally, there's just an increase in churn overall. Yet, what we're seeing now doesn't reflect that same state that we've seen in the past. the federal benefits of an additional $600 per week in unemployment benefits are actually giving more income to a lot of Americans than they had previously. So it's enabled them to spend more than they might have, potentially stocking up on supplies. But basically, people have not necessarily tightened the reins on their spending, at least not on the e-commerce side or in subscriptions. So this is data strictly from our clients, from PLC's clients. The bar on the right is April. So just looking at what we're seeing is a lot of volume going up. The average order value is a little bit down in April, or since the pandemic has begun, but that's kind of a different mix of what people are buying. So in general, huge uptick in consumers subscribing to goods. When we look further at the sales by vertical, we can see health and wellness has pretty much skyrocketed. B2B had an uptick. They're trending upwards overall. Publishing on the bottom right grew substantially. Obviously, the drawback for publishers is most of their revenue does come from advertisers. And as advertisers are pulling back on their ad spend, what publishers will need to do is retain these subscribers so they have a larger rate base when advertisers come back. Box companies, we saw a huge surge in March, but we're still seeing a lot of volume in April. Again, the goal for all of these companies will be, once they have these new subscribers in, how do they retain them for the long haul to keep this traction going? The other thing we've seen recently, differently from other recessions and boosts in unemployment, is approval rates have actually increased in the past few weeks. So normally we would expect to see more potential fraud, more cards being stolen, insufficient funds with consumers not being able to make payments. But we haven't seen that yet, which we can potentially attribute to the massive unemployment benefits that people are getting, among people just still needing to spend and maybe not spending as much on some things and having more funds on others. When we look at our approval rates by vertical, we can see again health and wellness approval rates have jumped. Box are kind of up and down. Publishing is over where they were in the past, and B2B companies are also essentially flat as far as their approval rates overall. The question is, are we headed toward a cliff? So we have a lot of good metrics here, but that could be worrisome. The benefits are expected to end, the extra federal unemployment, at the end of July. There was an announcement last night that they do not expect to extend those benefits. So we will anticipate an increase in involuntary churn, an increase in cancels and refunds, an increase in friendly fraud and other disputes, and then more gaming on free or low intro trial offers. Sorry. The other factor that might be playing into some of this boost in sales is the hoarding factor. So a lot of consumers initially went off and overbought at the fear of not being able to have access to things. I know I personally spent a ton of money on groceries in March, right before we were locked down. And then my weekly grocery bills thereafter were a lot less as I was tapping into the items I had in my freezer. So a lot of these categories, particularly in the health and wellness for vitamins and nutraceuticals, could be that consumers were overbuying initially and then they'll have less need. So they might be likelier to cancel a subscription down the road when they realize they have enough in stock and less fear of not being able to get to it. So involuntary churn and customer dissatisfaction. We're already seeing the reduction in average order value. It could be indicative of a couple of factors, and this is very recent, just kind of by day. It could be consumers more conservative with their funds as they anticipate potentially losing more money. It could also be that retailers, merchants are offering more discounts. So perhaps the average order value is down because merchants are trying to meet customers where they are and prevent the churn before it happens. In some cases, for subscription merchants particularly, it might be worthwhile to reduce a fee in order to keep someone on for the long haul and then raise it back up a little bit later because you're extending that lifetime value. But we'll get into that again in a minute. One thing we're also seeing among our customers is the card type mix is shifting. We're seeing, I'm sorry, small numbers, an increase in prepaid card usage across all of our clients. This is representing the percentage of successful sales by the card type. So it doesn't take into account how many attempts were made, which will then impact the authorization rates. But you can see that prepaid cards, April went from about low 2% to 3.2%. Suddenly in May, and this was as of 3 days ago, we were at 6.1% of volume being conducted on prepaid cards for subscriptions. What we typically will expect to see with prepaid card usage, higher insufficient funds and higher invalid transaction types. Those are the key decline codes you can expect from prepaid card usage. So now it's time to really evaluate your prepaid strategy. Do you want to block or do you not want to block? Things to keep in mind, stimulus payments are being deposited to over 4 million Visa prepaid cards. Those are technically non-reloadable. There may be another stimulus payment coming out. It's unclear if those would be on the same cards or not, but unemployment benefits are being dispersed to prepaid cards, and those are reloadable. So if you do want to hit someone up on their prepaid card with their unemployment benefits, you just need to be aware of what kind of card it is. With your current payment system, are you able to identify card types up front? And can you target your strategy by profitability metrics? Those are all key things to figure out, to think about, and make sure you have that sort of insight into your business. So to tackle your insufficient funds declines, I mean, traditional recovery tactics remain the same, but it might take longer to recoup the money, or you might not be as successful overall with your attempts as you have been in the past. So we still recommend you try, use Updater, recycle, keep working on getting that authorization approved. Balance that attempt with your fees. Make sure that you're profitable as you go through all of your retry attempts. If you're paying a lot per authorization and you have a low ticket value, you may choose to stop your attempts at some point and ask for another payment method, or do whatever you do when you can no longer get payment from a customer. But there are other options you could do. There's the concept of a partial authorization. So if you try to get $20 on someone and that declines because of insufficient funds, maybe you're willing to take $15. So perhaps you authorize for $15. This is a bit risky, and John, you can feel free to weigh in here. It could cause some consumer confusion if they're expecting to see $20 from you and they see 15. So that's a bit of a gamble, but it is an option that's out there. It's available for you. And then if operational recovery fails, you may want to offer temporary discounts to keep them on longer.
And I think, Melanie, to your point, any strategy that retains the customer is a good strategy because, as everyone knows, it costs more to obtain a new customer than to retain an old one. So all your strategies should point towards the retention of your customers, and make sure you understand all aspects of that retention strategy.
So we're also seeing distribution disruption, supply chain interruptions, and the inability to create new content. So products made overseas or components of products made overseas, shortages in the pipeline, delays in transit can impact your ability to fulfill products. Digital media has a different kind of challenge where they're unable to create new content. So as much as I was riveted by the cornhole tournament played in an empty gymnasium, ESPN is one of the lucky few who happen to have 30 years of documentary footage on MJ and has been able to rivet us with The Last Dance. A lot of over-the-top merchants, providers don't have that kind of content that they've been sitting on, and they're able to put together to create something pretty spectacular. So if you've especially charged someone for a year subscription and now you can't deliver on that content, you might face customer dissatisfaction from that. In addition to all of that, consumers are used to receiving everything immediately. Amazon has created the ability for us to not have to have patience. We don't have to wait for anything. We want everything on demand, whether it's content or physical goods. And when there are delays, it can make your customers antsy. You could get an increase in refund requests, an increase in disputes. You might get back orders and customer complaints. But it also can impact your overall process. So evaluating what you're doing, whether it's physical good or digital media, when you get an order, have you pre-authed and you're only capturing when you deliver? Is that auth still good by the time you deliver, or do you need to re-auth? And then you might have breakage during that time period. Are you capturing the money at the time of sale and then you have to reverse it if you can't ship your goods in time? In some capacity, you might need to do partial shipments. So if someone's ordered multiple things or they have a box plus an add-on, maybe you can only ship one piece and only bill for the component you're shipping. So being able to break up your shipments and your billing events into different payments could be a challenge depending on how your systems are set up. So something to consider here is just whether your infrastructure allows you to handle any of these permutations you may encounter, or whether your systems are dictating your business processes. We've already seen an uptick in this consumer dissatisfaction and the impact it has on the back end. So when we look at our chargeback reasons, we can see starting in April, an increase in consumer disputes. So this is a customer called their bank because they're not happy about something. In this case, you can see the increase is primarily due to not as described or not received, which could be either they didn't receive a physical good or they were promised they could have access to a theme park every month and they can't get that, or they're expecting to receive content, original content, and it's just not there. So we have seen, travel and entertainment are the hardest hit in this vertical now. But you can expect these metrics to actually continue and get worse if your supply chain continues to be interrupted.
Mm-hmm.
So, one way to prevent the chargeback is to have a generous refund policy, even if it's only temporary. But here you can see, again, the refund among our customers is going up a bit in April. There's also the other factor of March had higher sales, so the rate is lower. In April, as more refunds are coming in on potential March transactions, that rate will go up. This is also something to keep in mind for your own business. Your merchant processor often doesn't like to see a very high refund rate, so you do have to balance making your customers happy, preventing a chargeback, with also appeasing your acquirer and making sure you're not exceeding their acceptable levels of refunds. And again, if sales do decline in coming months, in August after the stimulus checks are gone, then you can expect refund rates to increase because your denominator has shifted. So these things are somewhat obvious, I think, but a lot of people don't necessarily embrace all of these. And some of them might just be temporary measures. Some of them might become permanent business practices. But always make it easy to contact you so that they don't have to contact their bank instead. If you are going to have service disruptions, clearly state it. Explain what's going to happen, when they will receive everything. Offer them some sort of compensation to make up for any sort of dissatisfaction they may experience as a result of it. Obviously, you can offer discounts, incentives, extend a subscription, prorate toward the next term to prevent a cancellation or a dispute. There's various things you can do in order to try to keep the person with you for a longer period of time. Food and clothing companies really pioneered this concept of the flexible subscription because they needed to, right? So when you look at someone like HelloFresh, you can see all of these sort of dynamic areas where a consumer can self-serve their subscription to their terms, and it can help prevent a cancel. And this sort of service is now becoming expected among a lot of consumers for different types of subscriptions. So allow someone to pause a subscription, allow them to modify it, to downgrade it, upgrade it, however it makes sense for them, so that you can basically meet them at their payment comfort level. The furloughed customer might not have received the PPP funds in order to get their employment check and to start working again. And so they might need to pause until they know what's happening with their employer. And allowing them to do that means you don't have to cancel them for the long haul, but you can retain them for longer. The fraud impact we're seeing, typically, or generally, fraud rates are higher than last year. It is targeted to certain verticals. We're seeing an increase in bot attacks as well. We're also seeing an increase in resellers who are buying cheap, either the low intro monthly rate and then canceling, or buying it on a prepaid card intentionally so that it can't renew, or they're buying things on stolen cards and then selling them at inflated prices on marketplaces. So if you do have a low intro trial offer or a free trial offer, that is something to consider. You might have someone buying now, canceling, or intentionally not allowing you to renew them because of their payment method, virtual credit cards, all of those types of things, and then selling your product at Amazon. This is showing symptoms of bot attacks. What we've been seeing across our merchant base is this invalid account number decline often indicates that someone has been attacked by a bot testing credit card numbers. So a lot of the attempts that they make fail, most of them fail, but for those that fail, a few will go through. Likely those will result in chargebacks, but this is just an example of what we're seeing across about 60 different merchants here. You could see April, the invalid account number went up. In May, it's gone up even significantly more than that. So just something to keep in mind when you're looking at your decline mix. Make sure you have alerts, you have all the indications you need to monitor your business and understand exactly what's happening. So to tackle fraud, ideally you want a purpose-built fraud solution. More and more merchants are going that route, and it's really hard in this day and age as fraud is getting more and more sophisticated to not go that route. There are some temporary band-aid measures. So if you find that you have been hit with fraud and you don't have a solution, or your solution hasn't prevented the fraud that you're seeing, some options you can do are screen on CVV and decline on a mismatch. You can also screen on ABS and decline on mismatch. We would only recommend doing that if absolutely necessary, just because you will get false positives and it's not as successful on international orders. Also do frequency checks, determine how many times it's reasonable for a person to mess up in your shopping cart and then need to retry, and block any frequency beyond that. You can also block a suspected IP, geolocation. If you know a certain bank identification number is problematic, you can block those bins. You could also add CAPTCHA to the checkout page. If you're concerned about blocking conversion, you could consider adding CAPTCHA to certain offers, or if you know a source of your marketing is potentially more fraudulent, like a certain affiliate that you're working with, you could add it to those checkout pages, but not to all. So these are kind of band-aids, but if you are encountering fraud, you really should be investigating a fraud solution. The good news, the opportunity, and ACI, thank you for this data. The global growth of e-commerce, 209% year over year, with, again, Crafts and Wine, 900% plus, with a lot of that being on subscriptions. Consumers are adopting digital wallets at a greater rate. This facilitates e-commerce with less friction. particularly m-commerce and global commerce. And also, as we saw, more consumers internationally are now embracing different payment methods online, which in the past has been a bit of a challenge for subscription companies, because a lot of international consumers weren't really accustomed to a traditional credit card bill every month subscription. We expect that will continue as more consumers are becoming comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, with the shift in, I was always accustomed to buying something offline. Now I've been forced to buy it online, and I realized that was kind of easy. I like that. Having it brought to my door, I don't have to go anywhere. There will still be lingering fear of germs, particularly flu season, so there might be more reticence to go out in public, and people will continue to want to interact online versus in person.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Good point.
Yeah, and one other point here, we've come across this lately, is merchants have asked us, how do we do business overseas? How do I obtain domicility so that I can access local payment methods? And one answer to that, this is not a paid political announcement for PayPal, but you should consider, if you haven't already done this, especially overseas, adding PayPal to the mix, because consumers can add a local payment method to their PayPal account that you would not have access to ordinarily. So if you remember Melanie's slide in Germany, the credit card acceptance is somewhere under 40%, but PayPal accounts can be linked, for instance, to a European direct debit account. And so if you're accepting PayPal, you would then have access to all those accounts you wouldn't have access to in a cross-border situation. So that's just one example of how to examine your acceptance and your acceptance policies to increase sales overall.
Mm-hmm. Good points. Good points. So I suspect everybody has a lot of questions because there's a lot of information. Melanie and John, thank you very much. We're going to go into our breakout rooms now to discuss this and ask as many questions as you need. There'll be a PLCer in each room. So June, you can start breaking us out into rooms now. We're going to break out for 15 minutes. And then at 2:45, we do our next session. So we have our breakout sessions. There's actually a break for everybody to get a little bit of a break. And then we start the session on data at 2:45. So Melanie and John, if you want to add yourself to a breakout room. If not, then you can leave this and join as an attendee, and June will put you in the breakout room for you to leave. So your choice on that. And I'll stay here in case anybody has any questions while June is getting us into the breakout rooms.
Hey, Tanya.
I think I'm in breakout room 2. Can anyone hear me?
I can hear you. Donna Harper.
Hi. I think according to my screen, I have Donna, Mike Rogers, Jesus Lizardo, Mike, yeah. Kalela. Let's see if anyone else is joining. And there could be others, certainly. But and this is Tanya.
Hello.
Hi. This is intended to be a free forum discussion. So anything you heard in the last roughly half hour, we'd like to be able to discuss it. And so if anybody wants to kick off a question or a comment, please feel free to do so right now.
I'm curious, John, clients that are international, specifically in Asia, who from a COVID-19 perspective are, a couple months ahead of us, what trends are you seeing there?
Our focus, to be quite fair and frank, is not so much in that area of the world. You can imagine, practically speaking, if they are truly ahead of us and they're coming back, then we should see the new normal there before we see it here. But to be fair, there may be some other presentations that can address that part of the world better than I can personally.
One of the card networks had shared from a chargeback perspective that they're seeing actually when the second peak is hitting, that it's kind of been cyclical and it comes back and then it's going down. So I'm just curious if you've seen the same thing, but if you're not in that region, then it makes sense that you haven't seen anything.
Hey Tanya,
go ahead.
From our breakout in the last session, both Federico down in Argentina and then Christian here, but working in South America, definitely found the same thing, that over the last month they're starting to see chargebacks go up in those regions, maybe after freemium gets completed and so forth.
Yeah.
And again, it's a little spooky from our perspective. The merchants, now we have a small sample size of about 50 to 60 merchants, so we're not claiming to understand the entire universe, but we have not so far seen the what would be the obvious dips in sales, the increase in insufficient funds declines, the increase in chargebacks, all the things you would have expected to happen. We haven't seen that yet. But as Melanie pointed out, when the COVID checks run out, I quite unexpectedly got a check a couple of days ago. I'm not unemployed and I'm not taking unemployment, but someone from the federal government felt that I needed $1,200 or $1,300, which I guess I should accept. But once all that, those trillions of dollars, if they start to dry up, then the real race will be on, and that's the thing it's very hard to obviously to predict. If I could do that, I'd be on Wall Street now. But it's very hard to predict it. But the truth of the matter is, do everything you possibly can to retain existing customers.
Hey,
I
John.
think go ahead, Donna.
Well, I had a question because it was brought up, and by the way, great presentation, really good information. And I'm with ACI also. When it comes to the trial, right, subscriptions, I know I get caught in these all the time. I got to guess with more time on people's hands, do any of you see an increase in free trials and then forget to cancel after whatever amount of days or hours sometimes, because it just seems like that would be a huge risk with chargebacks. Do you see that increasing these days?
We haven't seen it, but it's common sense, right? If people have more time on their hands than they're used to, they're going to fiddle around with things like this. They're going to try things they wouldn't have time to try otherwise. And they're going to forget because they're going to go on and do their normal life again. The card brands, and especially Visa, have really put the hammer down on free trials. And for merchants that are compliant, it's going to be very hard to forget that you signed up for a free trial because of the if you want to call the restrictions that Visa has put on that marketing, that you must vigorously notify people that they have signed up for a free trial, when it ends, what's going to happen when it ends. The messaging has to be crystal clear. So the intention is to reduce the effect that you've described, which is I forgot about it, they took money on my card, I never authorized the card, I charge it back, right? That's syndrome.
Yeah.
But that's one of the card, both the card brands now, of course, have different degrees of this directive, but we're thinking that will reduce that type of noise at least a little bit.
Yeah, okay, that's I was thinking someone's got to be doing that, right, lately. Okay, thank you, John.
So I was just going to emphasize, and Jesus, jump in here. I think this is why, with a lot of data, you have to distinguish geographically. You have to distinguish, e-com versus subscriptions versus biller. They all have their idiosyncrasies, and they're all going in some ways in different directions depending on which sub-verticals you're talking about. I think that what's nice about working with the platforms like Vendicia is they're very finite in their customer base, or more finite in their customer base. So what are you seeing from your customer base, Jesus?
No, so far, going back to the point from Donna, we didn't see a significant increase in chargebacks in the past 2-3 months. But there is a potential there on the chargeback, but because people is free trialing, is doing a lot of free services. So I'm pretty sure the merchants are going to be challenged on retaining those customers. And depending on how they structure their payment strategy, you can see some spikes in chargeback temporarily. But so far, we didn't see that yet. In the past 2-3 months, seems to be in the normal rates for subscription merchants that we serve.
Got it. How about yourself, Mike?
We haven't seen any. So all of our customers are U.S. And it's a relatively low-cost subscription. We haven't seen really an increase in chargebacks. Maybe a slight increase in refunds. I'd have to really go back to take a closer look, but nothing significant. I'm curious about the refund data that was presented. It looked like between 5 and 6% was sort of average, if I recall.
Yeah, so the data, there were two lines, and sometimes that's misleading. One is a unit-based refund rate, which is typically lower. The line above that was the value refund rate, and what that tells you is, generally speaking, on average, higher priced items are returned at a higher rate than lower priced items. That's all that tells you. But what we did see is that little tail at the end of both of those graphs in May did indicate could be two things. Merchants are being proactive about refunds because they know the tsunami's coming and they want to avoid chargebacks. That's quite possible. It could be many merchants use chargeback services that are actually able to deflect a chargeback and create a refund, and many merchants use these services. And we'd have to hear from those vendors to see if their volume is up. And that could be why we're not seeing a big uptick in chargebacks, because they're being intercepted by these chargeback remediation companies, Ethica, Verify, et cetera. And the refund rates are going up, but not the chargeback rate. Now,
sorry, I was just going to say that's definitely our case. We only recently got set up with VMPI, which it has made a huge difference in chargebacks for us. But that was only in the last few months. So I bet that rollout is probably sort of happening as all of this is happening, right? I think there's a lot of companies that may not be totally set up yet.
And that's exactly right. And again, refunds are twofold, right? They can be merchant oriented, initiated. They usually aren't. but in this case, they could be, right? And then, of course, the consumers realizing either they didn't really want the product or they realize now maybe they can't afford the product. That, of course, would affect that.
Paul, do you guys work with kind of consumption-based, I don't want to call it subscription, but repeat customers with card on file, or is it specifically subscription?
Yeah, so our practice has a preponderance of subscription companies. However, some of those companies also do what you would call more traditional card on file business, like, for instance, like Amazon. They may have your card on file every time you go to buy, you one-click shopping, etc. So, but a card on file is in terms of payments very similar, and some might say it's the same as a subscription, because you have to maintain the payment method, you have to update the card regularly, you have to deal with declines the same type of way that a subscription company has to deal with them. So Jesus, I don't know if you might want to comment on that, but to me, card on file and subscription is really almost one and the same thing.
Yeah, and we see most of the subscription companies are moving into that direction, that you have a subscription, but you have the ability to purchase a product or a server at one time with the card on file that you have. So most of the, not most, but significant number of merchants, I don't have the percentage in my mind, that have the recurring subscription, but also have that one-time payment possibility for you to buy, products and services outside of the subscription with the card on file.
Where I was kind of leading with that question is, as so many consumers, are picking up or, having goods delivered, I was curious if, on the DCS side or just in general, if we've seen some new players come into the market needing your services.
Go ahead, Paul.
I'm sorry, I must have missed the last part of that question. You said new vendors.
Yeah, as the prepay ahead of time, go pick up or get delivery, and you have a card on file. As that environment has changed over the last couple of months, I'm just curious if you've seen some new big players coming into the picture needing your services.
Well, not specifically. I mean, we pick up new clients pretty continually. So I'd have to check with my other partners to see if there was a specific example of that, but not anything specific from our part.
Yeah, and Tanya, I'll talk a little bit about that later, but there is a study out there by Subtet that says that 75% of the retailers will launch a subscription service in the next 3 years, by 2023. I think that trend is going to accelerate because with the COVID, with remote everything, everybody is at least exploring a subscription line to their business to address that market. It's going to remain remote and reluctant to go to a physical location. So I think that's going to accelerate a lot of businesses to explore a subscription line on top of whatever they have today in traditional business.
I think we just got the word that we're supposed to break here. Is that everybody seeing that right?
Yes.
Well, this is John. It was nice to see some parallels between our data sets. Ultimately, we see both fraud transactions and payment transactions going up in e-com, similar to you guys. And ultimately, we look at fraud solutions almost more as payment intelligence, not just fraud, right? Sort of from end to end for the customer journey, and they really should go, like with a Nintendo or an Adidas or whatnot, the volumes kind of go in parallel at this point. So so that's the good news, is people are doing their homework around the payments.
Right. Well, thank everyone for joining the breakout, and I hope you'll continue to be entertained and amused as we go forward. So thank you all, and we'll see you after the break.
Sounds good.
John.
Yeah, bye.